Yeah, so let's start there. Maybe we could start with Hallie. Because listeners will be familiar with Kate, or those who are interested can go back and listen to her episode. But Hallie, it says in your name here, PsyD, you're a forensic psychologist. What kind of psychologist are you?
Yeah, so I'm a licensed psychologist. I do about half my work in forensics, so in the divorce and separation world, and then the other half is really a hodgepodge of therapy with people both involved in the divorce world and just typical adult work. And then I also do disability evaluations, adoption evaluations for international adoptions, and a variety. I've done like some other forensic evaluating and consulting. So I'd say, yeah, maybe a little bit more than 50% in the divorce realm, and then the other portion in a variety of psychological tasks and things like that.
Okay. And is this a second career for you, or when did you know you wanted to do this?
I've always, psychologist, I didn't know until I was out of college. So I thought I wanted to go to medical school. I took the MCAT. I majored in biology, and then halfway through junior year, I realized that I hated biology, but I think I had all of the requirements at that point. But I realized that when I was meeting with my advisor, that I had accidentally gotten all of the requirements for a psychology double major minus like one or two classes. And so I was able to double major in psychology basically without any effort. And so at that point I started thinking like, maybe I don't want to go to medical school. Maybe I want to do something that's a little bit different. And so I took a year off after college, and I worked at a nonprofit that did mental health education in Title I schools, and did some like just general mental health education and nonprofit work. And then I applied to GW, and I ended up out in DC for that. And so I always knew I kind of liked the more forensic and assessment side of things. And I've always been fascinated by divorce. I think before I knew that was really a professional aspect, I just had always been curious, like, when did you know that you didn't want to be married to this person anymore? When did that become a thing? Like, how do you decide to get to that point? What led up to that point? And I still find myself really fascinated by that aspect. And that's what I like about it. I do these custody evaluations, parent coordination, consulting in a lot of, case management, things like that are all related to the divorce realm. And I still find it just fascinating as to how the puzzle pieces fit together and how they got to be where they are. And so that's, even though it's a contentious line of work, I find it, very, very interesting, and still really enjoy what I'm doing. And that's kind of how I landed here over time, just getting more and more involved in the community and getting referrals and getting cases and building up a caseload.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, if you're at cocktail parties, do you ever get people who say like, oh, I could never do that. I could never do what you do. Like,
not even a cocktail party, like everywhere.
Everywhere, yeah.
I'm sure, Kate, you get the same thing, but it's like, especially amongst my friends, I mean, colleagues from GW, where it's a super psychodynamically trained program, and that is not what I do at all, really. And a lot of people most mental health professionals, I think, are really scared to get involved with such a litigious community, and to potentially go to court and testify or be subpoenaed or whatever it is. I think a lot of professionals are really scared of that. And so it's something I think it is really intimidating until you've done it a couple of times. And still then it's still intimidating, but I think absolutely it's something that most professionals, I think, would not want to touch with a 10-foot pole.
Now, forgive me, did you say, where are you from, Hallie?
So I'm originally from the Midwest. I'm from Wisconsin, and then came out here for grad school.
Okay.
Stayed. Yeah. I don't know if you can hear I hide my accent, but
I can hear it. Okay, great. Well, thanks for sharing. And Kate, for you, again, listeners can go back and listen, but just so this is a standalone episode, how did you get into the field? When did you know you wanted to be a clinician? And even you're the owner. Actually, since last time I talked to you, you opened a new practice, the Fair Winds Counseling.
Yeah, so that, yes and no. So it is, I opened an Annapolis office. And so
Okay.
that clients, and a Baltimore office, so clients wouldn't be confused by the Bethesda in the
Oh,
name.
makes sense. Okay.
It felt helpful to have kind of like a DBA, so that,
Right.
people didn't get, oh, we can't work with this practice because they're
Of
in
course.
Bethesda and I'm here. So yes and no. So new website.
Right.
Everything else is the same.
Right. Well, but congratulations on
Thank you so
expanding to new
much.
offices. That's great. So yeah, tell our audience, how did you? I know this isn't a second career for you, but when did you know you wanted to do this kind of work?
I feel like I don't want to say like I fell into it, but I loved psychology in college. I was a psych undergrad at St. Mary's, and I just thought the work was really fascinating and understanding how people think and relate. And I feel really lucky that my advisor at the time kind of recommended marriage and family therapy. I think I knew I liked the idea of being able to work with families and kids, and that felt like the best fit, as compared to social work and, professional counseling. And I didn't know much about it. Kind of at the time, it was like, okay, this seems like it's going to be the right fit. I really think it would be cool to go be a therapist. I had a great experience as a teenager with a therapist, so I think that drove it as well. Like, can I be that for other children and teens? And the program was phenomenal. And then I went to work at a school after, which was a great 7 years. Working with middle schoolers, which, similar to divorce, most professionals wouldn't want to touch with a 10-foot pole, but I really loved that population.
Yeah.
It was great. And then the divorce stuff, because I think that's actually relatively new since I was on with you last. I mean, in terms of the amount that I'm doing with it. So this is where it's like, you hate to give your mother credit for being right, but when I was working at the school, she's an attorney, and she was telling me about this thing called collaborative divorce. And she was like, this, I think it's really interesting. It involves mental health professionals. I think you should look into it. I was like, yeah. Like, there's no way for me to do that right now at linkages. So I kind of just brushed it off. But when I opened the practice, I thought, let me revisit that and see. And I'm kind of the type where it's like, if I'm going to do something, I'm just going to throw myself fully into it. So I took the training, got involved with the local board. And so now work as a child specialist for families who are going through the divorce process. And my approach, and part of what drove this kind of collaboration, is how do we make divorce more child-centered? Because obviously, as a therapist, that's what I see is, the kids who are going through this, and now the families as well, more, and the parents. But there's got to be a better way, to preserve their mental health and to preserve their future in a way that, helps them just be successful and thrive. And so that's kind of what this was born from, is kind of continuing to do that just in a different way. Kind of as parents start embarking on the journey of how they can frame that process for themselves. So yeah. Right to hear.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. There's a couple things I want to respond to. One is just, I always find it so lovely when I hear people share their own experiences of having been in therapy, whether they were a kid or an adolescent, and just like, it's just beautiful to imagine, when that goes well, when it's a positive experience, and then it's like, oh, I'm touched by that. Or even people in adulthood, sometimes that's why it's a second career. They're like, oh, I went into therapy and I was like, this is what I want to do for others. And I never cease to be amazed, or I'm always moved by that. So I really appreciate you sharing that. And then I was also curious about, I totally get the notion of wanting to offer child-centered approaches for the parents in these families, or these families that are rearranging. But I was curious, like, are there any particular experiences, single case episodes of memories, like, that come to mind where it just kind of reinforced, like, yeah, I'm more and more, I'm just seeing a need in the community for this? Or was it just like in school being like, yeah, people tend to make this mistake, and you're like, yep, I want to offer this. I'm just kind of curious how that, came into how you were inspired, and whether that was through direct experience or otherwise.
Yeah, I feel like through
Yeah.
just working with, I mean, the population I worked with primarily coming out of grad school was children, adolescents and children, and divorce was often a part of their story. Sometimes it was the reason they were coming to see me. Sometimes it was just a part of the family dynamic. And I think, honestly, it was in working with the parents and just seeing how their dynamic had such an impact on the well-being of the child, not only as they navigated the actual divorce, but how the family worked after the divorce, and often the long-term implications. Because sometimes in private practice, I'll see a kid for a little when they're younger, and then they come back at different points, and just seeing the impact as it evolves for a child over time. And certainly the divorce work with collaborative, which is very family focused and very child centered, just helps show like there is an opportunity to educate parents and to coach parents in a way that they can show up to this process and life after this process more concerned about the needs of their kids and understanding what that is. Because sometimes parents think they know, but you have to help them redefine it a little bit. And it's not innate always, and the emotions get in the way. So just being a part of that so that the kids aren't necessary. I mean, I think everyone could benefit from therapy. So not saying they don't need to come see me, but just so that they can really thrive and not struggle.
Yeah, that makes sense. Hallie, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I was going to add, I think what makes the two of us a good fit, like what is also like, so Kate has this wealth of knowledge with the kids, and I've been working with the adults primarily. And I did have a distinct moment in a custody evaluation where the parents were represented by, phenomenally well-known and expensive attorneys, and we're going through this, a costly custody evaluation. And, I'm not even costly compared to a lot of the other evaluators out there. And one of the parties not knowing a pretty basic resource for divorced parents. And this was at the end of the evaluation, and being in my mind like, I wonder if there had been some kind of education about different processes, different resources open to parents at the outset. If that would have changed the trajectory here and saved these people all this money and all this time. And I tell parents, when they start a custody eval, this is a very invasive process. People don't think it's going to be, but I'm in your life. Like, I'm talking to you many times. I'm talking to your kids' teachers and pediatrician and your friend, like I'm in there. And so I think it was I think that Kate and I had been meeting, kind of formulating things, or just maybe talking at that point. But I think when Kate mentioned to me, like, I think we could do this educational series, I was like, absolutely, because I think there is such an opportunity for parents at the beginning to kind of choose which path they want to take. And people don't necessarily know or have the perspective that there are these various options available to them, or what's in the best interest of their kids. I mean, most people do think that they're acting in the best interest of their kids.
Of course.
And the attorney's job is not always going to be to, back down on that. And so I think when Kate mentioned, we could do this educational series and workshops, I was like, yes, absolutely. Because I think that there are so many opportunities to talk not only just about the kids and their well-being and how to help them through it, but also for the parents to know, okay, here's how to regulate myself, or here's some information, or here's how I can communicate to bring down the temperature a little bit. And so I think that's where I absolutely had that discrete moment of like, okay, this is a point of intervention. When I read it, I saw an article on Business Insider this week about how millennials are spending, like, divorces are just destroying wealth for millennials. Because it typically costs, I think the average, it said across the US, the average cost per person is between $70,000 and $100,000 in legal fees, and the fallout. And so it's just, that's an astronomical amount of money, you know, to spend on a divorce. And so, and that's, you know, around here, it probably runs about that or higher too.
Yeah.
So just to take the opportunity of like, let's reframe that. Maybe some education or consultation at the beginning could help curb this escalation. And, you know, you could use that money and time and energy to focus on your kids and their well-being.
Yeah. All makes sense. Thanks for sharing. And as you're speaking, Hallie, I'm curious about the different professionals. This question for both of you. The different professionals that you interact with in your lives, and if when you tell people about your work, if they're giving you unsolicited suggestions and saying, "Oh, that's so great. Have you considered this?" Like I was just thinking of a best interest attorney that's like, "Oh, that's so great that you're doing that." Have you? Yeah. So like, have you had other professionals that are adjacent to your work offer like, you know, like, "Oh, maybe you haven't considered this," or people tend to be blind about that? Does that ring a bell or not really?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends. It's a case by case basis and maybe professional by professional, but yeah, there's a team, definite teams of people that can work together on these cases. And I think on my end, it ends up being a lot of attorneys and then sometimes the therapists. I love working with the therapists, so I always prefer when they're involved. And then, yeah, sometimes a best interest attorney who's, you know, there for the kids' best interests and the kids' priorities. And I think it's always helpful, you know, Kate and I talk about in our presentations to practices that it's always helpful to get feedback and to not be kind of in a vacuum alone. And because that just leads to maybe the isolated thinking or not seeing these other perspectives. So I think it's always helpful to, whenever somebody might consult either on a case or just in general, you know, I'm always open to hearing from coaches, attorneys, you know, other mental health professionals about blind spots, either in a case or in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How about for you, Kate? And I know you also talked about the wisdom of your mom. Has your mom ever shared like, "Hey, Kate, have you considered doing this, adding this to your and Hallie's project here?" You know?
Oh, I mean, like we've had a lot of excitement about kind of what we're offering. And I think there's been so many good ideas about topics, you know, just things that, you know, we've kind of interfaced primarily with like parent coordinators, therapists, and attorneys of just what they're seeing in their work with clients and where there are challenges, or, you know, whether it's a gray divorce or adult, like, you know, when you have adult children, or how to start dating, or
Can I pause you?
Yeah.
What's a gray divorce?
So older divorce.
Okay, I'm just
a silver divorce. If you
I say that a little bit nicer.
I'm asking on behalf of audience who are like, "What's that?" You know.
Yeah. So divorce when people are older, that would be the gray divorce. And often they will have adult children, right? So that's also a unique experience. But we've gotten a lot of insight from other professionals on where there are areas of need for these families, and kind of what's born out of that too is needs for professionals who, you know, don't get a lot of training on what is in the best interest of kids. You know, judges who sometimes have to make decisions about access schedules and things like that may not understand, you know, when children have particular mental health needs, like what needs to be considered when making choices. And as Hallie said, like a lot of therapists, you know, when I talk to them, there's a lot of anxiety about working with this population, but they're seeing it, and they just sometimes will make decisions that will cause problems for them, you know, as they continue working with a child or a family. So we have probably too many ideas, you know, that to work on, and we're trying to kind of funnel and make some progress and continue to watch it grow.
Sure. That's great. Abundance is
of ideas.
It's a better problem to have than a poverty of ideas.
Yes.
Because with abundance, you can amalgamate and group and categorize and say, okay, these things make sense together. Because I actually just toggled over here to look and say, one of your on-demand courses that the Co-Parent Collective is offering is this Navigating High Conflict Divorce Strategies for Therapists.
Yep.
You know, you mentioned that, and So I'm curious that maybe now or maybe later makes sense to just kind of inquire a little bit about what those on-demand courses contain, or do you feel like that's appropriate to get into now, or should we do that later?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you want to jump in, Hallie, or do you want me to, whatever works?
You can go ahead.
So the on-demand courses as of now, so we did the 3-part series, was kind of what started all of this, which was how to have a child-centered divorce. And we broke it down into kind of 3 areas. The first was the truth about children and divorce. So that workshop in itself talks about, for parents, how can they look at this through their children's eyes? What do they need to know about how children experience divorce and parent relationships through divorce? And we also talk about the divorce narrative, which is how parents will share the news that they're getting divorced with their children, which will become the narrative that the children use as they tell other people as well. Mm-hmm. The second one is Divorce 101. So something I didn't know anything about when I started this was how many options there are to actually get divorced. And I think most people don't realize. We think about like what we see on TV or like litigation, but that's not the only way. And, there's collaborative, there's mediation, there's settlement negotiation, there's so many options. So we talk about that. And we talk about other aspects related to just kind of the divorce process, things to consider, access schedules, things to consider when you're making like a parenting plan. And the last one, which I think is the most important, is co-parenting. So how to have a healthy co-parenting relationship. It's the longest one and probably one we'll create a part 2 for because there's such a need. And then, the other one is for therapists or professionals who work with families of divorce, how to set yourself up for success, because they truly are a different type of case and client. And there are things that are really important to do up front to just make sure that there are good boundaries, good communication, protect you and to protect, often if you're working with the child, their space. Right.
Yeah. I mean, selfishly, I want to kind of work backwards because there's a lot of, maybe before I inquire, Hallie, did you want to add anything?
I think that's what's out there. We have a lot of, I think, ideas for shorts, and we're always looking, we're hoping by the end of the summer to have a few about blended families, and summer planning, holiday planning. It's all, I always say when I'm doing mediation or PC work, like, now's a good time to start talking about Christmas because that's going to come up and you're going to fight about it if you don't have it clear. So we're going to do holidays, summer, blended families, part 2 of communication. So we have a lot of ideas for additional webinars to create.
Right. Awesome. Well, I want to like selfishly ask on behalf of therapists that may be watching or listening, and obviously you can't give it all away because you're marketing products here, but if you can tease us with sharing some, I'm curious, what are some of you say these are different cases when you work with these families. It's like, I can't remember what it is I'm trying to communicate here about kind of setting the tone and just like you never get a second chance to make a first impression, or like the delicate nature of earning and maintaining trust and all these. So when you talk about that, to whatever degree feels right to share it, what are some things that professionals who are tuning in or watching this should know, who do work with these kinds of families, clients, and are like, oh, what might I be missing? Share some wisdom, Kate.
So I treat all families that are coming in. Oftentimes my practice will work with the child. So when I talk about this, it's primarily the child is your client. Oftentimes it ends up being or feeling like the parents are also your client, but we're referring out for that because the goal is to preserve the space for the child. When divorce is really contentious, that can just be insidious into the therapy space if you're not really careful from the start. So all divorce cases that come through, I treat the same way, also because even when parents seem like they're communicating well at the start, sometimes things devolve. And if you don't set it up at the beginning, expectations around roles and communication, I'll talk a little bit more about that, then you're going to run into problems down the road potentially, and it's hard to walk it back. So the biggest kind of two pieces I'll share about is roles. So there are a lot of different professionals that can be involved with families of divorce. We've named a couple: parent coordinators, divorce coaches, therapists, family therapists, best interest attorneys. When you're working with a child, you have to be very clear who's your client and what your role is, because it can be very easy to suddenly step into other roles, whether it's co-parenting or working with one parent, or right. And they will try to suck you into lots of different roles. They're very good at it. And so you have to have clarity about where your boundaries around your role are. And you have to often consistently communicate that to the parents. So I will often refer to someone like Hallie as a parent coordinator and say, you know, I need to protect my space with your child. You guys could really benefit from having someone work with you around making decisions, communicating, things like that. Here, go work with Hallie, right? And I'll coordinate with Hallie or collaborate with Hallie as needed. But I don't want you to bring your stuff, because, you know, you'll get books of emails, right, of arguments between the parents, and none of it applies to what you're doing with the child.
Right.
So that's one. And the other is, I would say, really a lot of clarity, speaking of emails, around communication and what you will and will not engage in, because they will try to pull you in as a middleman. I'm very big on, as much as possible, having joint calls and conversations so that they can't say, well, you told dad this or you told me that. I don't want to play that.
Can't do it.
And everyone needs to be on every email.
That's
which
right.
is often one that parents try to slide in. And from day one, it's, you're either CCing them or I'm going to reply all and include them.
That's right.
And I will. And pretty quickly, I think they recognize that, and either then are better boundaried about what they communicate about via email, or then move forward and include the other parent. So, I mean, those are a couple of the big ones to really keep in mind. And again, consistency is key.
And I'll jump in on that too, because so with kind of from the other, or from another side too, like as Kate was saying, like referring out, kind of staying in your lane, I think is a big one, right? Because I think sometimes people will feel compelled or pulled by one parent or both to say like, oh yeah, sure, I'll opine on where the kid should be, or the kid tells me they want to be with dad, I think they should be with dad, right? Like, and to know that that's not your role here, is to dictate who the child is going to go with or what they're going to do, right? Or to be really even to be an advocate necessarily for the child. That's a different role. And so I think kind of knowing where the lines are of your involvement, and that goes for any divorce professional. And then I would add too, just again, because Kate and I think Kate, I won't speak for you. I've enjoyed working with Kate so much that it's nice to have somebody else that's doing something similar, especially in such a contentious field. And I think having consults, having a group that you can go to, which is important for any mental health professional, any therapist, but especially in these kinds of cases where it can be really grounding and, not isolating, to have people that you can go to and get, use as a sounding board or get feedback from, or even just commiserate with after a difficult day.
Yeah, totally agree. Thanks for sharing that. I was wondering how do parents often react positively, Kate, when you let them know you're framing like this space is for your kid, or if they're siblings, like this is for them, and you all are gonna refer out. Like how does that often go smoothly, or like what's been your experience?
I have found, this more direct approach is like not naturally who I am. So I've had to kind of develop it over time, working and making mistakes and learning from what happens if you aren't more direct and clear. And I have found when you're upfront about it, and often you're setting the stage on the initial phone call and during the intake. So there's expectations from the start. And I think if you're consistent with it, there's not a lot of pushback. I think where I find that parents get upset is when you don't communicate that clearly, maybe allow some things, and then suddenly it's unwieldy and it's gotten out of control, and now you're trying to contain it. That's often where you get the pushback. They won't necessarily name, well, you used to do XYZ, but that's essentially what they're saying is like, wait a minute, right? Why is this sudden change in how you're addressing this, how you're handling this? And I'm big on disengaging and firm but friendly. Like I'm very, friendly in how I do it, but I'm very clear. Come back and let me know once the two of you have decided,
right.
Kind of thing. And I find that they tend to respect that. I have not gotten pushback really since I've kind of taken a more proactive approach with that.
Yeah, it seems to be absolutely needed, and good. By the way, good for you for growing in that. Recognizing. I share that same disposition, or I just know that I have like people pleasing parts, and absolutely we become aware of it. Like you say, learn from mistakes and growing in the field and all that. I also, but before I pivot to you, Hallie, in terms of when you receive referrals from Kate and working with the parents, people might be wondering, when you are working with the kids, either one kid or siblings, do siblings share sessions together, and what does that child-centered work look like? Or even for the lay audience listener who's just curious about this stuff, what would it look like if they're like, oh yeah, I know my cousin's getting divorced and they live in the area. What would that look like if they were a consumer of your service?
I mean, working individually with a child, I'm big on, I will work with one child. If there's a sibling that needs support, I'm referring to either another clinician within my practice or, outside of the practice. And part of that is because oftentimes divorce will be a part of the work. It's not always the entirety. And you want the kids to feel like they have space to share about all the dynamics at home, and not have it be a conflict of interest. But again, like I said, divorce is sometimes just a part of the work, and depending on the child's age, it's supporting them in developing either healthy coping skills to navigate the changes and adjustments in the family, and any kind of emotions that are coming up for them, whether it's sadness or anxiety or anger. So you're kind of addressing those symptoms and potential behaviors as a result. You're also, working on sometimes ways for them to communicate their needs within the family. If they are struggling with something, it's supporting them in how to tell mom and or dad or, either parent what's going on and what their needs are, or kind of doing that with your support, if they're comfortable. It's also, again, age dependent, but understanding how maybe the impact of the family dynamics, how that's impacted them as individuals, and, what they're noticing within themselves as a result. So for example, I just did a child specialist case, and a meeting with the daughter, one of the oldest daughters. She said, so insightful. It was pretty incredible. But she recognizes that she has this fixer kind of people pleasing part that has come out of watching her parents' dynamic. And there's a part of that she appreciates, but also this other part she recognizes may cause challenges in her own relationships as she gets older. So sometimes it's helping them unpack that and understanding that and making different choices for themselves. So it can look all different sorts of ways. And with littles, it's just like play therapy and helping them experience through their way of communicating.
Yeah, very insightful indeed, for sure. Thanks for sharing that, Kate. Hallie, for you, what does it look like when Kate hands off, a family comes to her and she's like, all right, guys, this is the space for the kids. Go talk to my friend Hallie. So what does that reception look like? Or walk us through it.
Yeah, because it depends on the role. So if it's something like parent coaching or divorce coaching, it's really working with the parents. So I don't work with the children directly. I'll evaluate children, but I'm not a child therapist. I can test little kids and I can interact with them for a little bit, and then I that's where the edges of my expertise are.
Yeah.
But so I don't do any therapy or any therapeutic work with the children, but so I would help parents with refining communication, or in a parent coordinator role, sometimes I'll make decisions for the family or make recommendations, which can be, binding or non, depending on their agreements. A question I get a lot is like, so if I had binding authority as a parent coordinator, it would basically mean that these parents have agreed to let me be the decision maker for them after they've gone to a certain point. So it's like usually they'll mediate 2 or 3 times, and then if they haven't reached a decision within a certain amount of time, I will make that decision for them. And I've been doing the PC work, I think, for about 5 years now. And I have not had to, I've made some smaller decisions, but I haven't had to make some big ones that I've worked on with. Because I think the ultimate decision for these parents is they would rather make the decision with this co-parent that they hate than let a stranger do it. Because I've been about this close to like picking schools for kids, picking a private school, picking a preschool. I have picked therapists for people or taken therapists out of a case, which is really difficult. But I think that's where a lot of my work would ultimately come down to, is kind of like understanding, looking at judgments, looking at communication, helping streamline some of these decisions. I do a lot of like rewriting of emails and highlighting, this is, it's when you called so-and-so like an overblown jerk, like that was probably unnecessary to say in your email. So I do a lot of rewriting and stuff like that. But it's really working with the parents to get rid of all the past and really focus in on what is happening in the present, and to focus that on what truly is the best thing for my kid here, not just for me, but for my child, and how do I make that a reality for them. I don't want to spend an alternating week away from them, but is it disruptive for them to be going back and forth between parents' homes all the time? Yeah. Is it going to be really hard for me to acclimate to that? Yeah. And ultimately that's the best thing for the child, right? It would be helping them come to terms with something like that too.
Yeah. Yeah. I found myself wondering about what the evaluation process looks like for, like, what's the youngest child age that you've worked with or evaluated?
I think a 9-month-old. So I evaluated dad with a 9-month-old, all the way up through. I've had cases where there have been kids who have aged out. So they're like not part, like the younger sibling is part, and technically I'm not evaluating the 19-year-old or the 18-year-old.
Right.
They're part of the evaluation as a collateral, so I'll still meet with them and sometimes for them to be a part of the home evaluation. But yeah, I mean, the evaluations can vary drastically based on, how old the child is. The observation I did with a 9-month-old was very different than what we're doing with 13, 15, 17-year-olds. So it's really about just being familiar with what attunement and what the best interests. And there's so many, one of our colleagues who's absolutely wonderful said to me the other day, normal is a setting on a washing machine. And I think it's so true, because it's like, there is never a normal divorce case. There really isn't. Like, they're all, and I think that's why I continue to find them so interesting, is because there isn't normal. Even the normal ones are not normal. Like, it's everything is every single one is complex and interesting and has its own ins and outs. And that's what makes the work interesting and difficult too, because it's like Kate and I are putting together this, a presentation about complex needs in kids. And it's like, well, one ADHD kid is going to look totally different than another ADHD kid, and autism, one kid on the spectrum is going to look totally different than from another kid on the spectrum. So it's really just a matter of trying to get to know the families really well and understand them. And then to like get to the bottom of what really is the best interests of this child in this family at this time. And that requires a lot of flexibility on the family's part too.
Right. Yeah. But thanks for that. And I just want to follow up. And by the way, your people pleasing parts, if you have them, they don't need to lead here. Always feel free, because I can easily go on tangents and take us down rabbit holes, and you guys can be like, this is not why we agreed to come on this show. So please feel you have my blessing and permission. Okay. But I follow the natural flow of my curiosity. I just want to ask. So as much or as little as you want to share, on behalf of someone who's like, yeah, this sounds great, but I want to know, like, what does an evaluation involve in my, let's pick, like, for a 12-year-old, like, what exactly, I have no idea what that involves. What does that entail? And what should I expect in terms of receiving a report, or just.
So there are some pieces of it that are the same across all. There's some factors, right? So there's going to be in all of them, in a custody evaluation, or even a kind of what we would call a brief focused assessment, which is more if there's just, they could be done one or both parents, but that's where there's like one specific issue and we're maybe not looking at legal custody. We're just saying we need a tweak here, or, mom's mental health has deteriorated. We need to look at that and see how we can support mom so that she can parent better, and get back to higher functioning.
Right.
But all of those evaluations are going to involve interviews with both sides. This is how I do it anyway, but it's interviews with both sides. I do some psych testing, so that can kind of vary. I have a standard battery, but I'll add in stuff depending on what's going on in the case, right? So if there's substance use, I'm going to throw in a substance use evaluator in there, or screener in there. If there's not, might not do that.
Right.
So this is where it gets a little wonky. Well, no. So there's always collaterals, right? So I'll talk to the pediatrician, therapists, teachers, neighbors, babysitters, and then I'll talk to some character references. I always say, I want to get a couple of cheerleaders in here, because most of the time who the parents are in the context of this evaluation is not who they are in the context of their greater life, right? Like these are not people that are fighting with everyone around them all the time. A lot of it is really contained to the marital relationship. And so it's always nice for me and them to be like, have the reminder and the more holistic view of, oh, right, this parent has loving, positive, happy relationships. And then there may or may not be an observation. So in a custody evaluation, there's always going to be an observation of the parents with the children. And there may or may not be a home visit. Custody evaluations, I will almost always do a home visit. And then there's a protocol that was just developed by someone in the field that I really love to torture parents with, which it's called the I'm going to get it wrong, process-oriented something protocol. And it's basically, I have the parent A bring the child to my office. We do an observation in office. They play some games. And then parent B comes, and we may or may not do a joint activity all together, which is the next level of torture, or they just transition in front of me. Because the idea being like, I'm going to come to somebody's house for 4 hours or 3 hours, and most people can put on a show. Most people can clean up the house, whatever. But if you guys are really interacting and transitioning, the kids aren't going to be able to, like, this is in vivo. This is really how it is. And I have found that to be very helpful in the custody evaluation piece, right? Of knowing, I've seen kids be totally fine, and then parent B arrives, and immediately they are a different child.
That's right.
And so that's a fun form of torture for me, and I haven't done it with every single family, because it takes a certain level of stability of the child, and obviously if there were any IPV, like violence, interpersonal violence, or family issues, we weren't going to do that.
Right.
But yeah, it's a lot of different factors. And I think the last thing I'll say about it is, like, people get very nervous that if they say one thing wrong, or if they answer one question wrong on the testing, that they will be seen negatively. But there is no one data point that ever tips the scale. And that's something that I've gotten on the stand over and over and over is, well, if this result had been differently, would you have come to a different conclusion? And typically the answer is no, because all of my data points are coming from a wide variety of sources and formats, right? Like psych testing, collaterals, direct report from the kids, direct report from co-parent, interviews, behavioral observations, right? The list goes on. And so there are a huge number of data points that come together into this report. So these are big, long reports. They're 50 to 80 pages. And those go to the attorneys who give them to their clients. And then I would say the hope is that helps you settle out of court. In my experience, it often does lead to going to court still, or sometimes, it's maybe 50-50. But the intent is that it helps. I would say even when it has gone to court, most of the times the judges will just take the recommendations from the report. That's it's a long process. It can last for typically 4 to 6 months to get from start to finish.
Well, I want to say, really appreciate you being thorough in that, because I, again, can find myself just like 8 different spider web questions, right? But I want to come back to you, Kate, and ask you, is there anything that Hallie was sharing that you wanted to pick up on or add to?
So actually, a lesser evaluation. So I've mentioned the child specialist role a couple of times. What I found, this role was unique originally to collaborative. So I can say a couple things about collaborative. So collaborative divorce, most people think that means the parents have to be collaborative. That's not actually what it's about. It's that there is a team that is collaborative on behalf of the family. So each parent has an attorney. Each parent has, there's either a 1 coach or 2 coach model. It depends. Originally, it was designed for 2 coaches. And they're coaching the emotional part of the process and helping facilitate communication and keeping the parents moving forward through the process and making space for, dealing with the kind of feelings that are behind the decision making. And then some cases will bring in a financial neutral or a child specialist. And the role of the child specialist in collaborative is to bring the kid's voice to the table so that parents have that information when they're making a parenting plan. What I have found is that role is often helpful even outside of the divorce process. I mean, often with families of divorce, right? But it can be people that have gone through the mediation process. It can be people that have been divorced 10 years, but there's a change that someone's moving, someone wants to introduce a new partner, and the parents have a different opinion about how to handle that. And also likely a different opinion on how the kids will handle it or feel about it. And so having a neutral third party come in and what I typically do is I meet with each parent, I meet with the children, I will speak to a therapist if they're involved, and then I give verbal feedback. There's no written report. And my feedback is very direct. I'm not telling them what they should or shouldn't do, but I'm kind of just saying, this is what your children's experience is. This is what their needs are as communicated by them. And oftentimes these parents are also working with like a Hallie, a parent coordinator, or still have an attorney involved. And they will either be involved in that feedback meeting or can then help facilitate, the parents using that information to act in the best interest of their kiddos, which doesn't always mean doing what the kiddos want. It just means that they're actually like hearing it and taking it into account.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing. I found myself wondering, now, Kate, you're a mom, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Hallie, do you have kids?
Yes. Yep. Many.
Okay. Many. Okay. Okay. So and again, just in whatever way feels right and appropriate for you, but this is the question that emerges is I'm curious how your experiences, actually, let me back up for a second. I should have asked this at the beginning. How long have you been doing in this specific role? How long have you been doing this work?
9 years.
Okay.
Yeah. I've been doing, my first custody vow was back in 2019. So the custody piece for 2018, 2019. So custody piece since then, and then the parent coordination piece since about 2020. Okay. When I came back from one of my maternity leaves, I started in 2021.
Okay. So here, and this may be a strange question, but I just found myself wondering, have you noticed when in your role as mom or spouse, co-parent, like when you're raising your own kids and you're informed by the experiences of the different families that you work with and interact with, like how has it impacted your own, have you gained new insights or new appreciations or it's informed how you talk to your kids about different needs? Or I'm just curious if that question lands at all, or if it feels completely irrelevant or inappropriate, but I want to ask it.
I was telling Kate and I met earlier this week, and I was telling her that it's hard to turn off in pop culture. Like I was telling her I was watching the friend, I don't even know what the name of it is.
Your Friends and Neighbors.
Friends and Neighbors, yeah, with John Hamm, and they're divorced. And I was, there's some comment that Amanda Peet makes, and I was like, oh, that is such a good co-parent comment. Like, look at her telling the kids this, and I think it's probably like a physician watching like ER or something, being like, okay, that's accurate, that's not.
Yeah.
So I think in that realm, but yeah, I mean, I think there are levels, I think, that having my own children increases my empathy for my clients, because sometimes I'm like, gosh, it's so heartbreaking when you really get down to it, of like not being able to be with your kids X amount of the time, or not being able to see them every day. And I think that brings a level of empathy and appreciation for our own, for being able to be with our kids.
Yeah. Thanks for speaking to that. How about for you, Kate?
Oddly enough, the other hat I wear around anxiety is what has like impacted the parenting and children. I always say for better or worse, my poor kids probably are so frustrated with me because I do so much work with anxiety, and I won't let anxiety win at all in our house. So, they will be very fearless, hopefully kids with some normal anxiety. So we allow a lot of, anxiety is not a problem, but, we're going down in the basement, whether we're fearful of it or not, we're not going to start any challenges. But I agree with what Hallie said, like being a parent gives you a new level of understanding and empathy for what it must be like for these families to adjust to such a different family dynamic. And, having kids, also being able to put myself in their shoes and what that might be like for them if that were to happen to our family, what might be some of the biggest challenges for them and how they might feel in those moments. But it's hard. I mean, this is hard work. It's sad work. And families can be okay too. So.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. I mean, also at the top of our discussion, I just thought about grief. I probably mentioned this the last time you came on, Kate. My wife talked about divorce. She's a child of divorce, and she talked about it's like a living death. It's a living death. I mean, if the parents are still alive, and there's, in terms of weddings and graduations and all the stuff that happens years, decades after the divorce, right? And my experience as a clinician, I find that the grief is like, you have like therapists, they're like, I'm a grief specialist, or like I'm a trauma specialist, or whatever. But like grief, like unprocessed grief, is in many ways like all the DSM, like the symptoms and stuff. It's like, this is so, just knowing that you're touching these really tender and delicate, these people who are in these tender and delicate moments. I get curious about to what degree your work includes loss processing, letting go, compassion, forgiveness, things like that. But as much as that kind of could lead us down, I want to just say something, because you named anxiety, and I'm a parts guy. I'm like IFS to the core. And I'm curious, did I ever see Inside Out 2 when anxiety makes her appearance? And I just have to say, when I watched that in theaters with my family, like my nuclear family, my wife, our two girls, and my parents, and that moment in the movie when anxiety is at the control panel, and she's like, I'm just trying to protect her, right? Like, and I'm like crying, I'm like bawling, because I'm like, that's right. That's right. This is such a misunderstood emotion. And so when Kate's like, like I'm a hawk on anxiety, I'm like thinking to myself, like, I hope Kate is like still loving that anxious part, that like, right, not demonizing the anxiety.
No.
But anyway, so we talked earlier about like co-parenting being a really important, the communication component being really, really important. Is that one of, I'm just navigating back, co-parenting for success, one of the on-demand workshops? And I might as well just plug it here. If people are listening that want to go, or I'll put obviously links in the show notes if you're in the car or you're washing dishes and you can't do this right now. The co-parentcollective.com. There's on-demand workshops, co-parenting for success. So what's something that maybe hasn't already been named around the tips that you can give listeners, viewers, about the importance of co-parenting, and maybe even like fails that are common mistakes or blind spots that these individuals make during this tough chapter of their lives?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big tips, the easy ones, I wish I could take credit for, is this acronym BIF that we would tell a lot of parents, which is brief, informative, friendly, and firm. That's a pretty low-hanging fruit. Like, I think it's easy-ish to put into practice for most parents, right? Is to think about being able to put all communications in that realm, right? Like, brief, these emails or messages should be short-ish, informative, stick to the facts, no color commentary. That's a lot of what I do as a parent coordinator, is cut out the color commentary.
Yeah.
And
Friendly,
don't respond to color commentary.
and don't respond to it, right? Because it just takes you down a rabbit hole.
It will magnify it.
Exactly. Friendly. I always say, like, you want to be able to, I think as we would say, like, do you want this, if this were going to be on the cover of a newspaper or the front of a newspaper, like, would you feel okay with the tone? And then firm, like sticking to your battles. You can have boundaries. It's okay to set limits, right? Like, and those can be firm limits. And that's a really big one that can be worked on. I think I'll tell parents, you want to be able to have a coffee shop conversation. If you're both standing in Starbucks in line, you should be able to have a conversation with your co-parent for 5 minutes that doesn't involve anything contentious or that isn't going to get whipped up into a big fight. And that's kind of the goal, is to be able to get to that point where you're able to have that coffee shop conversation, to, again, be able to just have more honest, child-centered and child-focused communications that aren't that doesn't have all the excess of accusations or attributions of blame and all of that really can derail decision making.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's also helpful BIF for people to remember that. And I definitely, appreciate the notion of just perspective take, like, kind of not having an out of body experience, but just being able to slow down and check yourself and be like, is this really how you want to be? It's very, I mean, the work that I do, it's like constantly helping people awaken from trance, the spell that they're under, or in the parts language, the part that's blended with them, that's not who they are. Hallie, you talked about that earlier in our conversation about, like, this is a whole person rather than just like the combative part that's showing up and is like cutthroat, right? Just having that space and pause for presence to have discernment and intention about how you want to show up in that role. Kate, what do you want to add to the importance or pick up on from what Hallie's offered?
So one of the things that I like to talk about is the filter of spouse mind or parent mind is a big one. So oftentimes what gets in the way for parents is obviously the marital history, the relationship history, and all the kind of baggage that's there. Yeah. And that can often be what drives decisions, right? They're making decisions from that spouse mind, from that place of anger or hurt or sadness or whatever it is. Sometimes that looks like it's in the guise of what the kids need, but often it's really, and so I'll say, why are you making that decision, right? Is it aligned with your parent mind, which is, I am doing this because I think it's in the best interest of my child. If I were divorced or not, like, this is what I would do. It's aligned with my values. Or am I making this decision because I really want to get at the other person, right? Or because I'm reacting to the other person's behavior or decision making. And just helping them kind of think about those two and make sure they're settling into the parent mind when they're engaging, because that can also drive, the engagement should be from that we're engaging because we're co-parents, right? Which means we don't need to rehash old narratives, kind of old hurts. Those things are only going to get in the way. That's what therapy's for. That's what, friends are for, to kind of work through journaling, whatever kind of outlet you have for that part that's still there.
Right.
So that when you have these conversations, it's like, we're two people who need to work together to take care of these kids for the rest of their lives. And so can we do that from a parent-child centered space?
Absolutely. And I love that, the parent mind and the spouse mind, because those are roles, identities, parts. And I'm just thinking exactly right, because there is this, again, not to go too spiritual here, but like there's this deeper self that it's not the parent or the spouse. And that self can be this wise acting, discerning, loving being that can say, oh yeah, like the spouse part that's carrying the hurt, or maybe wants to lash out or be like, oh, here's how I can get back, or make it even Steven, or whatever it is, right? Like the person can validate that spouse part that's like, oh, totally makes total sense that you would want to like propose that vacation or whatever, like it's gonna like drain their bank account or whatever. Be like that's valid. So someone can really validate themselves, and then also see, okay, and what you're saying, Kate, is we want to encourage people to be making the decisions in the best interest of their child and have clarity on that. And yeah, I love that. So yeah, thanks for
I get one of the most rewarding moments that I've had as a parent coordinator was with a couple that I worked with for a little, I probably like at this point, like 6 to 8 months was when this happened. And they had been really contentious at the beginning. Like one would hang up off the Zoom and had to be jump back in and all this stuff. And there was a point at the end where one of them said, you know, Bill, I don't agree with this decision that you've made, but I trust you as a father and I trust your judgment. And so I'm wholeheartedly giving you my blessing. Like I respect you and I trust you as a parent. So I'm going to go for it. And I was like, I should retire. Like I should be done. It is never going to get better than this. But I think that's what we want to get to, is where it's like, yeah, that person can, and I think, Robin, as you were saying before, like, I think so much of what we do is grief work or loss work, just in some respects, right? And especially in divorce, it's grieving the life that you thought you'd have with this partner, grieving the life that you thought you'd have with your children, grieving this part of yourself. And so I think it really, when somebody can get to that point of saying, I don't agree with you, but I respect you and I will trust what you're doing, is really, I think, the kind of the apex of where somebody has said, you know, my spouse identity is gone. Like I'm done. I'm grieving that. Like I don't have to feel these feelings towards them as my spouse. I can just think about them as my co-parent. And that's a hard mountain to get over. But once you're on the other side, I think it makes life a lot easier.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in real quick, Kate, the person, the example you gave, the person is advocating and speaking for the part that disagrees. It's allowed to have a voice and get witnessed and be seen. And then they're saying, but I trust your judgment. And I mean, like when people say that in my professional context, like I can't give a concrete example, but like when like you're saying, as a professional, when you're like, oh, that's like, if only everyone could. I tell people, sometimes I'll be like, oh, you know, if we were recording this session, I would present it at a conference in which, like, that's how you do it, right? Like I let people know, like, because they love that feedback and it's reinforcing. Anyway, Kate, you wanted to say?
Oh, I was just going to say that piece, and now hold on, it left me again.
Happens to me.
Oh, most of the time, I think it goes to the kind of what we've been talking about, in that you have to separate your experience with this person as a spouse and as a parent. Most of the time, I'm obviously not going to say all of the time, someone can be a crummy spouse, but a really great parent. And your kids often have a very different experience of the other parent than you do. So being able to tease those things out too, like Hallie said, and say, you know, you might have been a horrible spouse and I have a lot of anger and resentment towards you, but you have always been a good parent. And so I trust your judgment as a parent. I think that can be really powerful. And, you know, remembering that co-parenting, honestly, we talk about like divorce in and of itself isn't what's harmful. It's how parents get divorced and how they relate after. If parents can't figure out how to co-parent, that's what's destructive. That's what's the most harmful to kids. And so having a certain level of being able to let go of control, which is like the hardest thing, that's like one of the biggest challenges when you're working with parents, is like letting go of what the other parent does, because it's probably different than you. And 90% of the time, that's totally fine. Right. And then also trusting, that the kids will be okay and that the other parent is going to take care of them. And really putting positive energy into that relationship, because that is what is in the best interest of the kids.
Yeah. And I also was thinking when you were, Kate, you were relaying this example of like when a parent is triggered or activated and they're kind of taking it out, it's not how they're showing up is not in the best interest of the child. And it's like, you said something like, that's what therapy's for. And that's exactly true. It's like people, I don't remember the first time I heard the AFGO or another fucking growth opportunity, when people are like, I don't like, it's too much, but like those opportunities, it's like, here it is. It's right here. Like it's showing up as lashing out, but it's really a heart wound. And it's just an alarm. It's like an alarm that's asking to be healed, transformed, integrated. But obviously the person has their free will and awareness and how and when they want to tend to that wound. Or maybe they're not, most of the time they're not aware of it. They're just aware of the energy of being combative, the kind of energy that makes people at social events say, Hallie, I could never do it.
I think that actually gets really to the roles piece. Like the roles are so important for the parent and for the clinician, right? Like to say, even thinking like, okay, well, like refining that communication would be a parent coach role. But therapy, I work with a lot of adults who've been divorced, and that's the place to grieve and to process those emotions, right? And so it's like for the parent, it takes a lot of energy for the parent to put on those different hats. It takes a lot of energy for the professionals to put on those different hats to say like, okay, what role am I filling here? Like because if I'm a therapist, I'm not going to be like, ooh, that was maybe not the best email to send. But I'm going to be more like, oh, it's really hard to not want to make this, like you have to really think about what hat you're wearing in that moment when you do wear a lot of hats.
Yeah. I want to, I also meant to ask this earlier. I don't think I did. How did you two meet?
I was just trying to think of that, Kate, I think we were introduced by.
So our colleague, Sue Solar, who's like my mentor, I mean, she is what helped me grow my practice. She did the collaborative training that I took, and then I met with her for coffee afterwards, and to say she was pivotal in just like my therapy practice and how I envisioned it, but also just like building it like with clients and things like that. I can't speak enough about her, but she did a parent coordinator training, and Hallie was one of the people that took it, and she recommended, she's like, you got to reach out. I think you guys would really like each other. And sure enough, we met with Colleen at Lebanon.
That's right.
Lebanese Taverna.
No,
it was. Oh God.
Here in Bethesda has like the
right across from my office.
Bacchus of Lebanon. Is that how you say it?
Yes, Bacchus. Yeah.
And we had lunch, and we hit it off, and then it was like we did a couple like coffee lunches, and then I don't even know what prompted us to be like, let's do a workshap.
Kate, you definitely brought it up, because I remember when you brought it up, I was like, yes, let's do it. And then we got really great feedback, and then tried to kind of carry that through. And I will say, like the divorce space arts, we have wonderful mentors. I mean, Sue is amazing. There's a couple other women out there, and they've really tried to hand the torch, I think, off. And so people don't, like I said at the beginning, people don't always want to go into this space. And so when you find people that you really like and that you get along with in the space, I think there's an immediate connection. And so we have been saying like, we like working together. And so let's keep going on it.
Yeah.
And it's a good match, because I think we're both the same energy level around it. I've collaborated with, some other professionals where there's a lot of upfront energy, but, it kind of stalls. And it's been really nice to work with Hallie, and just we're both really passionate about it and really invested and see the potential and are driving towards it. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I'm thinking of like the group project in high school. Like, yes, I'm with the right person. Here's what I also want to ask. Has anyone proposed, and this may, you might have your plates are full or your interest level, but I'm curious about, has anyone suggested to you two about co-authoring a book?
We're just talking about this on Monday. Yeah, I mean, I think we would love to in the cards, or if that's in the cards in the future, I think that's something we'd definitely would like to do. Would be really cool. Or a podcast, maybe we'll emulate you, something like that. I mean, yeah, we have so many ideas. I think a book podcast, that kind of thing we've thrown that out. The educational seminars, a course. But yeah, if that's in the cards, I think we'd love to.
I probably ask because it's just so valuable. It really is. I mean, I'm not blowing smoke or kissing asses here. It really is. I mean, I'm also curious, like, about, well, you're not the only game in town. Other people are doing this work, but it's kind of a unique, I don't know. It's a unique relationship. It's a unique relationship. And I just find imagine it could be really helpful for people who, like the kind of consumer that's like, I've taken all the workshops. Is there more? And also, I mean, anytime you're working in the realm with children, it's just the amount of good that can be done or harm that can be prevented is just extends decades into the future. Yeah. So I guess that's probably why I ask. But so it came up on Monday, so not sure, but it could be in the cards. Haven't ruled it out. That's great.
Because I think you're right. As I think about the books like I lean into as a professional, there's absolutely some great ones out there, but in terms of kind of the area we're filling, I'm not sure that there's a really good, like, practical guide almost, right? Like there's a great The Truth About Children and Divorce. Like, I love that book, but it's a big read, right? For somebody who just wants to kind of get to the nitty gritty of tell me what to do here or what not to do.
Big.
That
the Sandcastle's Way.
Sandcastle's Way is a great one. Also really big. There's a couple of books.
I grabbed the wrong one. I have this. That was the first one you mentioned.
Yeah, that's the truth. So there's like a couple, but I think there's space where there's like a good combination of the ones that are out there to make it more accessible and digestible to parents. And that's kind of what and again, like keeping it very child-centered, child-focused and practical.
Yeah.
So I think we're excited about the opportunities out there. And we're just kind of chipping away at taking and saying yes and doing things to help see where it can take us.
It's great. Keep listening to your intuition, your instincts. So the Co-Parent Collective, when did it officially form?
Last fall? January?
I think
well, Hallie got pregnant in there and had a baby, so she really slowed.
I was gonna say my brain fog is still there.
So we had done the initial workshop last spring.
We started running the workshops, I think last like a year ago.
Yeah.
And then we ran them again in the fall. And then we officially put like the Co-Parent Collective, the name to it, I think around April. Like we had kind of a launch party for the webinars and them going live. And I think, it's been an evolving process over the last year.
Yeah. And what's coming up, I know we talked before hopping on air, there are live workshops that aren't on the website yet, but those will be coming this fall. What are those? What do you know what those are going to be on, or is it still being percolating?
We may do the same ones that are kind of on the workshop. The benefit, obviously, is that there's like live Q&A when people attend, and those are that's helpful, I think, for people, because we can, as I said, earlier, harkening back to the normal is the setting on a washing machine, is that sometimes people can get some questions answered of saying, if in this situation, what would you recommend or what would you say here? And sometimes we can give some very basic feedback about that. But often we will offer, 10 minutes or something with somebody afterward if they have attended the webinar and they have a further question. I think we've had a lot of feedback about doing another communication one, because that's been our most widely attended, is just like having this co-parent communication, doing co-parent communication 2.0, for people that have been married or divorced for a long time and need a refresher, want to make a pivot. We've had some requests for kind of children people who are grown and their parents get divorced, so the silver divorce or like gray divorce, and how that impacts. Because I find a lot in my work with adults that there's often this cliche mentality of, well, we'll stay together for the kids, or we'll fix it when the kids are older. But your parenting job doesn't end when they turn 18. Like, it's not like you send them off and they never come back. There's still Thanksgiving and holidays and all that, so we've thought about doing that, thought about, running live webinars on other topics, but I think very likely those three, maybe another communication one. And we'll probably, get back to those around the fall.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm wondering at this point here, kind of just like, if there's a couple of questions in my head, but I want to ask you all, is there a question that I ought to have asked that I haven't asked yet, that, you've been a treasure trove of information for our audience so far. And I just want to not leave people like, sometimes, again, I think I said this before, like sometimes I'll be like, I'll realize like, oh, I wish I had forgotten to do that in the interview section or I mentioned in the pre. But for you all, what have we not covered that feels critical or important in sharing with our audience today?
That's a question I ask every collateral. Actually, it's my last question to every collateral I do. I say, what is there anything I haven't asked that I should have asked that you want to tell me?
Yeah. So now it's your turn, Hallie.
I think I'll say the first thing that comes to my mind, and then Kate will defer to you, but like, is that if there's any professionals that are curious about it, I've talked to a lot of people that are curious about it, and I think it's important. I think down the line, we would love to have, similar to our mentors, like some training opportunities for people who want to get into this work, even reaching down to kind of the grad school level, because I just feel like there's a lot of, it might be too hefty of a term, but like some fear mongering around what it's like to be involved, or what it's like to get a subpoena, or what it's like to go to court. And it's not, it's not the most pleasant task, but is it the catastrophe that everyone thinks it is? Also no. So I think getting down to like having that consultation or training, even in grad school or early career professionals, I would encourage anybody to reach out to us. We're always happy to provide, to, talk and get coffee, or to provide training or supervision potentially down the line. I think that's something that maybe we would like to do.
And let me just also just say, like, as you were talking, Kate and I graduated from the couple and family therapy program at University of Maryland. And there, when we did training at different years, but like there are in-services and people. So I'm wondering about like in this area, local grad programs for you to be those kind of guest speakers or talk to the clinic directors and say, hey, because again, it's very valuable. And I don't know there's all sorts of topics, but that seems kind of related to what you're sharing, Hallie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Go ahead, Kate.
That was what I was going to kind of actually say about. So two things. One, just to say, I've been doing this since 2016 and I've never gone to court. So it's not a guarantee that just because you work with these types of families that's inevitable. There's a lot of ways to have clarity in your intake paperwork around what that would look like and to try to prevent that from happening. And it's worked thus far. So if you don't want to, you typically don't have to. But the other piece is, I think, particularly for me, is educating people around collaborative. I mean, there's obviously the educating therapists around working with families of divorce, but collaborative is such a unique process that is relatively new in the field. It reminds me of like when we were starting with the MFTs, and that's like, the baby in the field of licensure. Mm-hmm. Collaborative is similar in that way, that a lot of our mentors kind of started it in this area. And, there's this cohort of clinicians who are, not super far from retirement. And then there's this big gap. And then there's one or two mental health professionals, myself and one other one that does it in Montgomery County. And I feel like there's such a need for people to get involved. But the only reason I knew was because of, you know, my mom, who was an attorney, right? Like, it's not something we learned in the MFT program. You know, you would have no idea about it. So I'd love to see educating professionals, you know, who are just coming in the field to get trained in it, or to know that it's an option for families if they're working with couples or doing discernment, or, you know, working with children and their parents decide to get divorced. There's just so much education around what this is.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is like, that's what I was thinking, is that the fear, the charge that's around it, is that you would be doing a lot of dispelling of that by making the grad school circuit. And again, like, those are like little seeds, right? that get planted, and you don't know what will be harvested, but it's just really, really meaningful. And I want to thank you too for coming on. And before we close, point people to Co-Parent Collective has an Instagram account, coparentcollective.com. You all have a blog, there's resources, a newsletter, I hear.
We're going to be working on that. Yep.
Okay, there's a subscribe button there, and anything else that feels important to share before we bring it in for a landing here.
No, just that we're super grateful to have been able to be on here.
Yeah,
So
thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks so much. Okay, Kate Alcamo and Hallie Strauss, thanks for being here.